Okay, let's jump right into it. Today we're doing a deep dive into the final chapter of a source you've shared with us, chapter 15.
Uh,
And it presents something quite unconventional, what the author calls the sixth sense, which is framed as, well, the ultimate step towards success and understanding.
that's right. It's positioned as the very pinnacle of the philosophy laid out in the book, the 13th principle, and it's meant to bridge the more practical, tangible steps that come before it with something, yeah, much less definable, something touching on intuition, maybe even, for some readers, the spiritual.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack these ideas, like what does the source actually mean by the sixth sense? And also explore this really fascinating and frankly, kind of unusual method the author used that's connected to it. We're going to pull out the core insights and, the surprising details.
Exactly. It's a dive into the, let's say, less analytical, more intuitive side of this whole philosophy. Let's see what the source lays out.
All right, so let's start with this concept then, the sixth sense. The source introduces it as the final principle and describes it rather dramatically, doesn't it? Like the door to the temple of wisdom.
Mm-hmm. And the way it's presented, its main function is described as the channel. The way that what the source calls infinite intelligence can communicate directly with you, without you needing to consciously ask for it or even try. It just happens.
Okay, so how does it work? The source says the sixth sense is actually a part of your subconscious mind, specifically the creative imagination. So think of it like a receiving set. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Like a radio receiver. It's where those sudden ideas, flashes of insight, solutions, hunches or inspirations just seem to arrive out of the blue.
But what's really striking and maybe a bit, I don't know, frustrating for some, is how the source talks about explaining it. It explicitly says you cannot fully understand or explain the sixth sense to someone who hasn't first mastered the other 12 principles.
Right. The book really insists on that the experience and understanding you get from applying those earlier steps are absolutely necessary to even begin to grasp this final one. You need the foundation.
So it's presented as something that develops after you've done the work. You
Yeah.
can't just think your way into it. But, okay, if you do reach that point, the benefits described sound, well, pretty remarkable.
They really do. The source claims that through this sixth sense, you'll get these intuitive warnings about potential dangers, like in time to avoid them. And on the flip side, you'll be notified of opportunities just in time to seize them.
It's almost like having a constant internal guide or...
Yeah.
Yeah, the source uses the phrase guardian angel.
Mm-hmm. And the author does touch on the idea of miracles here, but they clarify their stance. They aren't suggesting, a breaking of natural laws. It's more that some of nature's laws are just so complex, so beyond our current grasp, that they seem miraculous to us.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
And the sixth sense, in the author's own experience, is described as coming as near to being a miracle as anything they'd personally encountered.
That's quite a statement. And central to this whole idea, according to the philosophy, is this concept the source calls infinite intelligence. How does the book actually describe that?
It's presented as this pervasive force, like a power or a first cause, or maybe an intelligence that exists just everywhere, in every atom, every bit of energy. It's described as the force behind all natural processes. How an acorn becomes an oak tree, why water flows downhill, the rhythm of the seasons, that underlying order.
Right. And the author makes a pretty bold claim there, saying they know through personal experience, through experimentation, that this intelligence can actually help you turn your desires into concrete reality. If, and it's a big if, you follow the philosophy outlined in the book.
Which brings us right back to that core requirement for the sixth sense. The source is very, very firm on this. To accept or even just understand the claims about the sixth sense, you really need to have mastered those first 12 principles. Otherwise, it basically says, go do that work first, then come back and decide if this 13th principle holds true for you. It's presented as a capability that unlocks through, disciplined application of the whole system.
Okay. So that's the idea of the sixth sense, this intuitive receiving set that develops through practicing the other principles. But the author didn't just talk about it theoretically. They developed this really unusual practice that seems tied into building character and maybe accessing this insight. Tell us about that.
Yes, this is fascinating. This practice, which the author shares, is quite personal, apparently came from their habit of hero worship. They had this strong desire to emulate people they admired, to really try and embody their characteristics, act like them, feel like them.
Really?
Yeah. And the author believes the sheer faith they put into this emulation, this intense focus, actually built their capacity for success. It wasn't just wishful thinking for them.
And this led to the creation of what the author called their invisible counselors.
Wow.
They chose 9 men they greatly admired: Emerson, Paine, Edison, Darwin, Lincoln, Burbank, Napoleon, Ford, and Carnegie. That's quite a lineup.
It truly is a very distinguished, maybe slightly eclectic group. And the method itself was what they called an imaginary council meeting. For years, apparently, every night before going to sleep, the author would close their eyes and vividly picture these 9 men sitting around a council table, with the author acting as the chairman.
And this wasn't just like passive daydreaming. The source states the definite purpose was to deliberately rebuild the author's own character, to create a composite of the traits of these imaginary counselors. It was an active effort, described as a voluntary rebirth.
Exactly. And a way to overcome a background the author felt was marked by ignorance and superstition. And the key technique here, the engine driving it, was autosuggestion.
Autosuggestion. Right.
Yes, it's highlighted as absolutely crucial. The book's philosophy is that we fundamentally become what we think about most, driven by our dominant thoughts and desires. And these deeply seated desires, according to the source, they compel us to find ways to make them real. Autosuggestion, or self-suggestion, is presented as the sole principle for building character. You impress the desired traits onto your subconscious.
So these nightly meetings were a powerful way to apply that principle.
Precisely. And the author gets really specific about it, which is what makes it so compelling. They describe exactly how they would address each counselor in these meetings, and they detail the precise traits they wanted to acquire from each one.
Like what? Can you give some examples?
Sure. So from Emerson, they sought a marvelous understanding of nature. From Napoleon, it was the ability to inspire men and that spirit of enduring faith, the kind that turns defeat into victory.
Okay.
And from Ford, they desired the spirit of persistence, determination, poise, and self-confidence. Very targeted requests.
Wow. And what happened? What were the results the author described?
Well, this is where it gets kind of uncanny, according to the source. After months of doing this nightly visualization, the imaginary counselors started taking on individual characteristics, things that genuinely surprised the author. They began to feel incredibly real.
Real how? Like they developed personalities.
Exactly. The source gives specific examples of these unexpected quirks. Lincoln, for instance, apparently would always arrive late to these imaginary meetings. He'd walk in looking solemn, serious, rarely smiling, which was totally different from, say, Burbank and Paine, who were apparently prone to witty banter between themselves in these sessions.
Banter. Seriously.
Yeah, and there's this one specific anecdote shared in the source. One night, Burbank is late again. He comes in all excited about an experiment where he was supposedly growing apples on any kind of tree.
Okay.
And Paine playfully chides him, reminding him that an apple caused all that trouble between man and woman in the first place. Then Darwin supposedly chuckles and warns Paine about little serpents growing into big snakes near the apple forest.
This is wild.
It gets better. Then Emerson is said to have observed, no serpents, no apples, and Napoleon apparently chimed in with no apples, no state, like a full-blown, spontaneous conversation.
Wow, that level of vividness and the characters developing their own dialogue and interactions. I mean, that must have been intense. How did the author react?
They became quite unnerved by it. Actually, fearful of their consequences is the phrase used. The author actually stopped the meetings for several months because they worried they might lose sight of the fact that the meetings were purely experiences of my imagination. They were getting too real.
That really underscored the power of the mind, doesn't it? And the author notes this is the first time they'd share this practice in the book.
Yeah, they mention having previously feared misunderstanding or ridicule, but felt less concerned about what others might say by the time of writing.
Understandable. It's pretty out there.
Right. It was a deeply personal and, unconventional tool. But despite that initial fear, the author sums up the benefits they got from it. Said it led them into glorious paths of adventure, deepened their appreciation for true greatness, boosted their creativity, and fostered honesty and boldness in their self-expression. So ultimately, very positive for them.
Now, the source also includes comments from its editor, which is helpful, giving an outside perspective. What does the editor make of all this?
Well, the editor's main point is that this kind of phenomenon isn't actually as unique or bizarre as it might first seem. They draw parallels to novelists, whose characters sometimes feel so real they seem to take over the story.
Right, I've heard authors talk about that.
Or therapists and motivational coaches who use role-playing techniques to help people access different perspectives or parts of themselves.
Okay, so there are some precedents, maybe. And did the editor have a theory on why it might work?
Yeah, their theory is quite interesting. They suggest that when you use your imagination to create these characters, you're doing it without your usual mental filters and inhibitions. So when you think as that character or interact with them, your mind is sort of freed up. It allows access to ideas or solutions you might normally censor or just not arrive at in your typical thinking mode.
Ah, like bypassing the inner critic.
Exactly. It's presented as a way the subconscious can offer insights, essentially turning desire into action or finding solutions, a tool for accessing deeper mental resources.
And does this connect back somehow to the sixth sense idea, the hunches?
It does. The source talks about the brain having some kind of structure. The science wasn't fully understood then. Of course, that receives what it calls vibrations of thought. These manifest as hunches.
Okay.
And these hunches often pop up, the source says, under extraordinary stimulation, like in an emergency situation.
Right. The classic example is the near-miss driving, isn't it? Where you react instinctively.
Precisely. The source uses that exact kind of example. A sudden, intuitive flash helps you avoid disaster by a split second. And the author says this is how their invisible counselors sometimes guided them through serious difficulties. The subconscious, working through the established imagery of these counselors, delivered those necessary hunches in critical moments.
So the way the author used these meetings actually evolved over time.
It seems so. While the initial purpose was more about character building, using that autosuggestion principle, later on they started deliberately going to their imaginary counselors for help with specific, difficult problems, both for themselves and for clients they were advising.
And did it work?
They claim their mind was most receptive to ideas, thoughts, and knowledge via the sixth sense during these imaginary sessions. And the source states the results were often astonishing. Though, importantly, the author makes sure to point out they didn't solely rely on this method for counsel. It was one tool among others.
Right, not a replacement for practical effort.
Exactly, which reinforces the book's overall message about developing the sixth sense itself. It's not like a switch you can just flip on demand. The ability to tap into this intuitive power, it develops slowly through application of the other principles outlined in this book. It takes practice and consistency with the whole system.
Got it. And the source also emphasizes the practical side too, right? Even if you don't fully get the how of the sixth sense.
Yes, it suggests you can still greatly benefit from applying the overall philosophy, especially, it notes, in accumulating money or material things. You don't need full comprehension to get results from the earlier steps.
So ultimately, the source is framing this book not just as a guide to getting rich, but as something broader.
Much broader, as a complete philosophy for attaining whatever they ask of life. And the sixth sense is presented as the key to unlocking full understanding. Understanding of yourself, of other people, of the laws of nature, and importantly, recognizing and achieving happiness. It's a capstone.
And to actually cultivate this sixth sense, what's the recommended method? Just keep practicing the other principles.
That, and the source, gives one specific instruction for this chapter itself: repeated rereading. The book suggests that each time you reread this final chapter, it will elevate your mental state, stimulate your mind to a higher degree, helping you eventually feel that connection, that touch of the unknown something that has inspired great thinkers and leaders throughout history.
Okay. And the promised outcome of developing this sense
Is gaining mastery over negativity, discouragement, fear, procrastination, being able to freely access your imagination, and ultimately being able to reliably transmute your desires into their physical or financial counterpart. That's the big promise.
Wow. So quite a journey we've taken there. We've dived into the source's concept of the sixth sense, this powerful, intuitive principle that supposedly develops over time through practice. And we explored the author's really fascinating, very personal method of using these imaginary invisible counselors, a tool for both character building and potentially accessing deeper insights.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique and unconventional perspective on how we might tap into deeper parts of our minds, maybe potential sources of knowledge. It blends that intentional visualization with the idea of intuitive reception. And the editor's comments provide a possible framework, connecting it to the power of imagination when it operates without our usual self-imposed limits. Food for thought.
It certainly gives you something to mull over, doesn't it? So here's maybe a final thought for you, drawing directly from these ideas we've explored. If our imagination, when we intentionally engage it, can potentially unlock unexpected wisdom or capabilities by letting us think without our usual constraints, how might you experiment with that idea, even lightly? What great mind, living or historical, would you maybe invite to your own mental council table to help you think through a challenge differently? Something to consider.